to this lunch hour study group on the Minnesota Green Bank concept. And we'll be using some different terms for it today. Green Bank is kind of the general term that's been used nationally and in many states to identify the concept that we're talking about. But we'll look for it being potentially different names as we're coming up with how this might work in Minnesota. My name is Sara Wolff. I am the Strategic Policy Director with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. And as we're gathering here today, I'd like to just begin the meeting with a land acknowledgement. And so, Julia, would you be willing to do that for us?
Yes, Terry, do you want to do that?
I would be happy to. Hello, everyone. As we're continuing to admit people into the space, and as you introduce yourself into the chat, I just invite you to pause for a moment while we acknowledge the land that we were on. So feel free to close your eyes or lower your gaze, take some cleansing breaths in. Wherever you may be, let us acknowledge that we are all on Indigenous land. Minnesota is located on the traditional and contemporary homelands of the Anishinaabe and Dakota peoples, the original stewards of this territory. We also acknowledge the trauma that is deeply embedded in the foundation of this country. The land we reside on came under control of the USA through genocide, slavery, and ongoing occupation. We recognize the deep historical, spiritual, and personal trauma that has impacted Indigenous communities, communities of color, and immigrant communities. By offering this acknowledgement of trauma, we affirm the right of people to bring their whole selves and stories into this space. And we affirm our intention to promote healing, respect, and love. Thank you all for your attention to this acknowledgement.
Thank you, Terry. Well, I'd just like to begin and set the stage for our great speakers today. Brendon Slotterback with 68 Degrees Consulting and Kim Havey with the City of Minneapolis. And I'd like to just indicate, as many of you may be aware, why MNIPL has a particular interest in the Green Bank. For the last 10 years, MNIPL has been working on solar projects that are based in the community. They've been marketing, working with financing projects and the various programs that are available. They were part of the first cooperative community solar array on the Shiloh Temple in Minneapolis. And they've been doing dozens of these projects. And so they have a good understanding, MNIPL has a great understanding of some of the barriers that are encountered moving towards those projects. Right now, they have a list of 24 congregations that are in the queue looking to facilitate getting solar on their buildings. And they have two projects specifically, two community projects that are all ready to go, except for being able to find the loan that will help them make it possible. So these projects have the developers and the installers ready and the plans, and they have matching funds, and yet they have this barrier of being able to get the loan that they need because they're smaller, they're medium-sized projects, and often financial institutions are looking for bigger projects to finance. So today we're hoping to shine a light on why there is a need to fill in gaps where we're not able to access, where certain underserved markets aren't able to access the capital they need to move towards the green technology they would like to use and install and be part of our green transition. So, so MNIPL has seen this space and these needs, and that's why the Green Bank is of interest to our community. And we're so glad you're here to be part of the study group to look at that with us. I think I'll just share a couple slides. If we could go back to that, Terry. I'm so appreciative of Terry running the slides here. I'm going to just place this particular Green Bank policy that we're looking at within the platform that MNIPL and partners have adopted for this year. And then we're going to go to the national context for the Green Bank, to Brendon Slotterback. Then we're going to hone in on some examples of local need with Kim Havey in the city of Minneapolis. And then I'll talk about some of the possibilities and opportunities there are within this state approach to a Green Bank today. And Havey will help us look at ways to take action near the end. So great. So many of you were part of our Indigenous Rights and Climate Justice platform launch that happened back in the first part of January. And so this may sound familiar to you, but we have 5 different categories or areas where we're really trying to focus our attention with policy work and our activism. The first piece is reparations. Reparations for our communities, ways we can be involved in that effort. The second piece is really understanding climate goals and the truth telling that goes around with knowing where we need to get to and what's at stake. The third bucket is that economic development and just transition piece. And this is very much part of what we're doing today with talking with the Green Bank. The fourth bucket is regulatory protection of people, land, air, and water. And the fifth bucket is environmental justice. Thank you. If we might go to the next slide, please. Quickly, we just might discuss what is a Green Bank. And the next slide just shows that this is a mission-driven institution using innovative financing and mechanisms to fill equity gaps in our transition to a zero-emission economy. So this isn't a bank that takes deposits, and it's not aiming to profit, to maximize profits. It aims to be financially sustainable, but not profit maximizing. And it uses capital to mobilize other investment. Next slide. I think Brendon's going to be able to speak to this, but nationally we have 23 states with green banks. And what they've been able to do is collectively in the last 10 years, mobilize investment, $9 billion worth of investment from $2 billion in public funds. So the overall concept here is that you're able to take what you have and leverage private investment to make your dollars go farther than they would be able to otherwise. So with that, the next slide, please, Terry. I think, Brendon, if it's all right, I'll turn it over to you to help us understand what's happened recently on the landscape in terms of Green Bank discussions.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to Minnesota IPL for hosting this important conversation, and for all of you for your time and attention today. My name is Brendon Slotterback, and 68 Degrees is a consulting firm that is me. And just a little bit of background in terms of why I'm here and how I ended up in this conversation. I work primarily with philanthropy and some advocacy organizations like IPL on climate solutions and how do we advance bold policy that's going to get us to our collective climate goals and equity and justice goals. But for the last couple of years, I've been doing that. But prior to that, I was also on the philanthropy side. So I worked at the McKnight Foundation, and actually a lot of some of the work I did there was really around this question of green finance. And as a philanthropic institution, we were approached frequently for support for projects, just like Sara mentioned, where there was a project that made sense on paper and maybe even turned a profit, but for various reasons, it fell in the cracks of what's available sort of from the private market in terms of capital. And those maybe Reverend, if you could go to the first slide, I could talk through that. So Sara did highlight some of this already, but just to sort of reiterate, projects, private sector capital wants large deals. They want big projects or big groups of projects to finance. They also want, although a project like a solar project might make returns, there's actually barriers in terms of accessing capital if you're not producing enough profit on a fast enough timeline. So, and oftentimes renewable energy and clean energy technology has a high upfront cost and a long payoff. So it makes financial sense, but you have to have a longer point of view and a longer timeline than private sector capital wants. So reducing interest rates, extending the term of the loan, for example, are things where we need a different tool or a different mechanism to help solve some of these financing needs for clean energy technology. So we saw all that at the foundation, and we tried some creative approaches to help do that on a sort of one-off basis, but even philanthropic capital is sometimes not large enough or not structured properly to solve some of these. So this is just to show you that folks have realized this for many years across the country, why we need a different tool to do to support some of this work. And the other one I would highlight here is just the perception or the reality of greater risk due to the characteristics of a borrower. So if a homeowner has a lack of credit history or a poor credit history or has low income, that might create barriers to financing. So it might mean that the interest rates are higher, the loan terms are shorter, or even that those folks can't even get access to a loan at all. So there's definitely a justice component to this in terms of serving communities that are historically underserved by some of these clean energy technologies. So that's sort of why we've seen the need for a green bank, and this is generally what all the green banks in the country have sort of grew up around, trying to solve some of these issues. So if you go to the next slide, please. I'll just talk a little bit about, Kim and Sara are going to talk about the local opportunities. So I'll focus mostly on what's happening at the national level and where we find ourselves right now. So as you may be aware, one component of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a very large spending bill, was this greenhouse gas reduction fund, which was $27 billion of grant authority that was given to the Environmental Protection Agency. And they specifically are charged with turning around that $27 billion and sending it to national entities and states for the purposes of supporting greenhouse gas reduction technologies, and under the guidance that at least 40% of that spending goes to LMI and underserved households. The structure here is that EPA is specifically given authority to grant to nonprofit entities. Right now, we're in a at a point where we're waiting for some guidance from EPA in terms of when and what kind of applications they will consider to access those funds. But we're anticipating that sometime in even the next few weeks to month, we will see some, like an RFP, for example, or request for proposals from EPA for folks to submit, their ideas for how they would use these funds. And there are a couple of coalitions working at the national level that will try to access these funds and then turn around and allow them to be used by state level green banks. One of those groups is being headed up by the Coalition for Green Capital, who's really a long-standing nonprofit that is sort of, the institution behind a lot of green banks in many of the states that we've seen. So they're preparing, for example, a proposal to EPA that would create a national green bank. That national green bank would then turn around and have the authority to send financial support to state level entities to support these kinds of projects and technologies. I think if you go to the next slide, I can talk about some of the features of the funding.
Brendon,
Yep,
could you
go ahead.
define LMI? There was a question in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Low to moderate income. So that's actually, I would have to go back and check if EPA has defined what that means. There's different ways that folks, have defined that. So depending on your household, usually it's depending on your household level of income, but it can be something like, 200% of the federal definition of poverty. But EPA, we may see a slightly different definition, but in general, it's a way of targeting the households and individuals that are at the lower end of the income spectrum. Is that hopefully that answers your question? And yeah, I'm looking at the chat. Yes, that's what LMI stands for, right? So just quickly, the EPA fund, the 27 billion is really broken into 3 buckets. $7 billion is not actually going to be used for something that looks like a green bank necessarily. It's going to flow from EPA directly to state agencies, municipalities, tribal governments, to provide financial and technical assistance for low-income and disadvantaged communities to deploy zero-emission technology. And it specifically cites in the bill language like rooftop solar, for example. So a lot of folks who are involved in the bill drafting actually understand this is language that Senator Bernie Sanders put in there to basically say we need a dedicated fund for LMI rooftop solar. So the language is a little bit broader than that. It talks about all kinds of emissions reducing technology, but it's that's basically what it's for. And it's the important piece is that it's going to flow kind of directly from EPA to probably these local entities versus funding, a state level green bank, for example. So there'll be some additional guidance, I hope, from EPA about how state agencies can spend that money and what kind of community engagement they need to do around it. But that's the idea there. And the question in the chat, residential, I believe that's a good question. I will find the language for you. I believe it includes both. I don't think it says just residential. So, but I'll look that up for you, Diana. And then the other $20 billion you can think of as the green bank pool of funds. The breakdown here is that, the Biden administration has committed to Justice 40 principles, saying that they will deploy, across the programs of the government, 40% of the benefits of those programs will go to LMI and disadvantaged communities. So this bill actually puts a number on that and says, 40% of 20 is $8 billion. So at least $8 billion needs to go through a green bank into those communities. So that's the breakdown there. But that $20 billion is what will fund theoretically a national green bank and state green banks. Next slide, please. When I was at McKnight, we supported the Coalition for Green Capital just to look at opportunities around a Minnesota Green Bank a number of years ago. And I'll put that link to that study in the chat once I get done speaking here, so you can take a closer look at it. But it came up with a number of underserved markets and specific project types that might be considered by a Minnesota Green Bank. And they did a number of interviews, I think 20+ interviews with local stakeholders, local financial entities, project developers to say, what do you need and what could a green bank provide? So just to give you a couple examples before I end here, this is again to think about the homeowners that are low to moderate income that have not traditionally had a lot of access to energy efficiency finance, for example. So the role of the green bank in this case could be to not actually be the lender. So you might still use an existing energy efficiency lender, and Minnesota has a number of those. But a typical loan that they offer might be 5% interest rate, and there will be specific underwriting criteria, like you have to have a certain type of credit score. So a green bank, the role for a green bank in this case could be to create what's called a loan loss reserve, which basically is just a pool of money that the green bank sets aside and says, if any of these customers default on their loan, this pool is reserved to help reduce that risk. So it will pay off the source of capital or the finance entity, like a bank or a credit union or another nonprofit that offers financing. So this would allow, for example, more low-income homeowners to say, I can access a loan for a new water heater or wall insulation or a heat pump, for example, and I can get really good loan terms that I can pay off, over the life of that equipment. So that would be a way a green bank could reduce that risk. And I think I have maybe one more example if you go to the next slide. I should say too, I think the examples that Sara provided in terms of solar projects that maybe are too small for private capital to be interested in, but are, they make total financial sense, for example, but they're just not big enough to attract private capital. Like that's another great example that Sara provided. We also heard about this barrier, for example, for electric bus adoption. Electric buses can be significantly more expensive on an upfront basis than a diesel bus, but the maintenance and fuel cost are cheaper over time. So, but when you're a public agency like a transit agency, and you need to justify every additional expense to taxpayers, those can be hard. Those can be hard sells to say, we'll make money in the long term. Trust us. So, for example, in this case, a green bank might actually provide, like, purchase or lease the battery and sort of so take that cost off of the public agency and allow the transit agency to pay that back over time. So the savings from maintenance and fuel are actually matching the lease payments for the battery, so they don't have to front the increased cost at the front. They can actually pay it off as they accrue savings over the life of the vehicle. So that was another way to think about how we could drive faster adoption of these clean energy technologies. And I think I'll stop there because I may be gone over time, but I know Kim and Sara have other great local examples, but there's quite a few. And the thing I would leave you with is just that, the green bank really should, the goal is to leverage private capital. So we're not trying to, we'd like to take this really big infusion from the federal government and say, we can de-risk private sector capital so we can grow the Minnesota Green Bank larger than it would be just from, federal government or state investment. And again, just thinking about what are the barriers to clean energy technology adoption. There are these financial issues like loan term, underwriting conditions, or new or innovative technologies that haven't been fully tested yet. So anyway, I'll stop there. Happy to answer questions. I will, and I'll put the link to the Minnesota Green Bank study in the chat. And I'm turning it over to Kim, right, Sarah, or to you?
Yeah, no, Brendon, thank you so much. And are you available to stay on for the discussion in case there are questions, or did you need to head out?
No, I can stay on until 2 o'clock, or I'm sorry,
Clock your
1
time.
o'clock
Yeah.
Central Time.
Great, thank you so much. Because a couple questions that I end up having for you, so thank you. But a great overview of some of the possibilities. I bet many of you are thinking about ways that you see, even in the organizations you're working with, possibilities for a green bank to be useful. So thank you, Brendon. And Kim, can we go to you now to bring us down to what you've been working on in Minneapolis and what you're seeing?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you. And would you describe the position you hold with Minneapolis too? It's such a
Sure.
Interesting area.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Havey. I'm the director of sustainability at the city of Minneapolis, and we're actually now part of a larger environmental team called Sustainability, Healthy Homes, and the Environment, which combines our environmental programs, services, lead and healthy homes, and sustainability teams together in one as part of the health department. So this is part of a restructure that happened as a result of the new changes with a strong mayor system that was approved a year ago during the elections in the city charter. So I'm now part of a team that has about 40 folks that are all working in some aspect of sustainability, environment, improving homes. So the role that I play is working on and being responsible for our greenhouse gas emissions, both at the enterprise, meaning the city organization, and also at the city community-wide, following that, tracking that, and establishing goals, priorities, strategies around that. So we really help come up with programs, and then now we're working with teams to do the implementation of those kinds of programs. But our policies that relate to everything from energy systems to waste, trash, water, are all part of the policy development that we do in the sustainability team. And what we're really interested in as far as the green banks is really looking at an opportunity for the city of Minneapolis to be able to be our own, we'll call it a green bank or climate innovation fund that would utilize these funds, which aren't referred to in the national level as a green bank very much either. They're referring to as greenhouse gas reductions or carbon emission reductions, things like that. For some reason, green bank doesn't have always a positive connotation in some elected officials' eyes. It's sort of similar to the Green New Deal. Like you can say components of the Green New Deal, but if you say Green New Deal, it can have a negative reaction. So this is referred to as a greenhouse gas reduction opportunity, or colloquially known as a green bank, because that's what it's sort of been teeing up. And we're hoping to be able to take advantage of as a direct applier to apply directly into that $7 billion fund to bring money to the city of Minneapolis. And if we want, we can kind of jump to the slides here. And one of the things I wanted to talk about just very briefly today is a great concept we have that we would like to support the development of resilience hubs in the city of Minneapolis. And in many cases, we've got some already going. So up on 38th Street, we're working very closely with the Sabathani Community Center to develop a resilience hub there. And part of that resilience hub concept is an idea of putting solar plus storage on battery storage on the building. And we were successful at the Public Utilities Commission in getting $9 million approved from Excel to put in a very large backup battery system at Sabathani, up on the north side at Jumez Staples Renewable Energy Partners building, now called I don't know if it has the exact, forgetting the exact name of it. Also at the American Indian Center on Franklin Avenue, and working with Little Earth of United Tribes Community also in Franklin, and looking at other opportunities around the city. But these resilience hubs will all be able to be a community-oriented organization that is also working on reducing its greenhouse gas emissions and being resilient in times of extreme weather. So a place where people can gather for food, warmth or cooling, access to emergency services, to power, those kind of things. And for example, with Sabathani, we're really looking at doing a complete redo of the building. And this would include, I guess I keep switching back, but if you want to jump to the next slide there, we're really looking at increasing the amount of solar on the building also to another 250 kW above the solar plus storage. We're looking at a large energy efficiency upgrade, removing all of their window air conditioners, upgrading all of their roof insulation, which basically they have none at this point. This building came to light a couple of years ago because as part of our energy benchmarking program, it was one of the buildings identified that must have an energy audit according to ordinance, because it scored a 0 on energy as an Energy Star score. So our goal is really to take this building from worst to first, because if we can really show that we can do it in this existing building, we'll be able to show we can do it throughout all of our existing building stock over a period of time. So what we'd like to be able to do is create a geothermal heating and cooling system, and be able to heat and cool not only this building, but potentially the Seward Co-op across the street. They are also building about a 50 unit senior low and moderate income housing development adjacent to Sabathani, and the city of Minneapolis actually has its one of its fire stations adjacent to this. But what's also really unique is we're maybe able to add on, our big plan is to add on as part of the 38th Street Thrive, and be able to create a district energy system that goes from George Floyd Square at 38th in Chicago all the way to this one at 4th Avenue and 38th Street as part of a geothermal heating and cooling loop. We've got some appropriations already, but one of the things that would be really awesome is for the Green Bank is the ability for us to lend on the geothermal heating and cooling system. It has a cost of about $12 million, and it does have an overall payback, but the payback is about 20 years. So getting financing to be 20 years to be that patient capital has proven to be very difficult. A Green Bank could come in, provide very low cost or no cost financing and that patient capital to be able to be there for 20 years, providing a cash flow benefit, lowering energy costs for Sabathani, as well as creating a long-term investment that we can build off of in components, so that we could build out as we do street reconstruction, new building, what have you, the ability to tap into this much lower cost, higher efficiency, non-fossil fuel-based heating and cooling system. But we need money to kick this process off, and that's always been a really big challenge. We have a similar project that kind of fell apart, but there's still some opportunity there called the Tower Side. And that really took a long time, and McKnight and Brendon was involved in helping support that. But it was very complicated to do. We'd like to have Green Bank financing to help reduce that complication and to allow us to move on with multiple projects, as compared to always spending 2 years to do a single project and the amount of energy it takes to get it off the ground. Put something in place for district energy systems that could help finance those. And I know that was recommended in this Green Bank study that was done that Brandon's referring to. The other big thing we want to do is that, you know, we have a goal to be able to get every residential home, 1 to 4 units of homes, to a near net zero energy, as close as we can get situation, or by 2040. That would mean that we need to be ramping up to a point that by 2030, we're going to be doing 5,000 homes per year in insulation upgrades and sort of pre-electrification readiness along with renewable energy. You just aren't going to be able to do that under our current funding schemes. We're right now doing 300, maybe 400, and a really good year in 2019 or 2018 was as much as 500. But we have nearly 88,500 of these homes in the city of Minneapolis, only 20% of which have actually, they have full insulation in. And the majority were built prior to any insulation requirements at all. So if we want to decrease and decarbonize our end fuel uses, such as fossil gas or natural gas used by furnaces, we need to be able to really make these homes energy efficient and really insulated. And that's going to be a great use as far as a resiliency strategy as well, because if we're able to get these homes well insulated, a loss of power, a loss of access to fossil fuel for any few hours at a time won't make any significant difference, because this home is being stayed warm or staying cool as a very well insulated homes. But the point being is we need to really take maybe some people remember the Metropolitan Airports Commission did this noise insulation effort, putting in new insulation. Basically, it was a weatherization program, new insulation, new air sealing, new windows. And they went, and it was basically an opt-out program. Everybody was in unless you said, I won't accept it. That's what we want to go to over the long term. And that's what we're going to be seeing as a recommendation coming from our climate equity plan. But Julia and Sarah had asked me to just give a couple of examples of what we're looking at for the use of green bank funds. And those are two really great examples that could really happen in the very near future, or at least get off the ground in the very near future if we have access to this green bank funding. So Minneapolis is planning to apply as a local entity for its own green bank funding, and there'll be a couple of multiple different strategies on that. I've also been talking with the state. Maybe we go into partnership with the state as well too on a larger application with multiple jurisdictions. That's a possibility as well. But we're talking to folks at the Port Authority and at the state level and with different environmental organizations working now to put this green bank legislation together that Representative Emma Greenman would like to see brought forward in the House. So we're very excited. Minnesota has a great track record of being a responsible, accountable organization and government that puts money into this. And now what we need to do is really focus our money first and foremost on creating efficiency, high levels of efficiency in our environmental justice communities known as our green zones and in other low-income areas along our cultural corridors, so that when it comes time for us to really start moving on electrification, those folks will already have much lower bills, and therefore the cost of electrification becomes much less, and we're overall reducing energy burden. We will have a goal in the climate equity plan to have every homeowner, every family or a household have a energy burden of 6% or less. So we're going to do that through the massive scaling up of air sealing, insulation, attic and wall insulation, renewable, and electrification. And I'm happy to take questions.
Kim, that is just so exciting. Thank you for those really innovative projects you're doing, those awesome examples. Do you have, and I love that you're able to quantify that what you're going for is every home to be able to have an energy burden of 6% or less. That's just awesome. Do you have a sense of how much money you think it would, the city of Minneapolis like to have in a green bank fund to achieve the goals you've set out?
We haven't done all the calculations on it, but we're looking at the home components of it, just on the residential side. That's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $45 to $50 million. So I would say it would be likely that we would be going for $100 million in that range. With $7 billion on the table, I say we shoot for the moon. We can argue or negotiate a lower amount, but we're really excited. We have a lot of big projects we could do, Sabathani and these other resilience hubs, and there's lots of other older buildings that we have, obviously both residential but commercial as well. And I'd love to see us go net zero on as many smaller commercials. So the small business side, I know Diana had asked about whether those funding is available. To my understanding, the funding would be available to businesses for solar as well too. So again, I know there's a lot of great work that they're working on Lake Street. But again, if we had a more longer term program that would be able to help make this turnkey instead of every project having to be kind of its own one-off, I think we can get a lot more penetration of solar in the city. And we passed last year, 2 years ago, I guess it is now 2021, a goal of 30% of our electricity coming from local renewable sources from within the city, as well as community solar gardens. So we're at about 8% right now. And we were told, when we set the goal to 10% by 2025, it was going to be impossible to reach. Well, we're at 8% now. So we're going to hit the 10% by 2025. So if we continue on the trajectory, we have the ability to get to 30%. Will it be easy? No. Will we have to cover everything that's got access to solar? Pretty much, yes. And the way that we do that is make it as easy and cost effective as possible. Simple, safe, easy. We can make this happen.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the questions in the chat. I'm just going to head into talking about the state opportunity, which I think might partly answer the question about how does the Green Bank get its initial capital. And I know there's a question about the longevity of the geothermal system, Kim. So if you have a chance to put that in the chat, that'd be marvelous. If you have that info. Terry, would you be willing to take us back to the slideshow? Thank you. So really what we're talking about is leveraging public funds with private investment for these underserved markets. One of the questions in the chat was, where does the Green Bank get its initial funding? And so there are several options here. And this is typically the public investment. And I'm just going to go back to that other slide just for the moment here. But so Brendon was talking about how the Inflation Reduction Act set up different Green Bank funds that are going to be used for states and communities all around the country in this competitive process. And hopefully Minneapolis is going to be able to really able to utilize that federal funding. It's possible also that that any government entity could put in some funds to do this. And so right now on the policy landscape, we're looking at the state of Minnesota's opportunity to invest in this kind of innovative financing fund for climate and equity related projects here. You all have heard that we have a surplus. It's somewhere around a $17 billion surplus right now for Minnesota. And it's important for us to kind of categorize that and understand that about 11.5 billion of that is one-time funding that's available. And so lots of different interests and requests for that information, lots of needs we have around the state. But what we're really seeing here is the possibility that the Green Bank or the innovative financing mechanisms could help stretch whatever dollars we do have to go further than they might have otherwise. So the next slide, thanks Terry, shows that these financing tools, and Brendon mentioned some of them too, with reducing interest rates or extending terms of the loan. There is the ability to work with direct investment, loans, and sometimes grants in combination with that. There's also the possibility of co-investment and layering sources of financing. And they've talked about reducing risk for private investors, those loan loss reserves and guarantees, and also aggregating projects so that that may otherwise be geographically dispersed. And the next slide. And then the next slide is the other thing that this concept brings us is the ability to coordinate with existing government and utility-based programs. And the next slide, we talk about how there's been a lot of communities around the state are really understanding that they are in need of technical assistance as the Inflation Reduction Act has been passed and is in the process of being filled out and rolled out. It takes a lot to navigate what is happening and what the opportunities are. And so a beautiful thing about these green bank concept systems is that they can bring that technical assistance and expertise into one place. And one of the concepts we're talking about is the ability to have segments of the greenback really servicing certain parts of the state so that that expertise can be brought in a packaged way to those communities and towns. A few fundamentals things I'll just roll over. There are many ways to construct a green bank. One of the ways is making a quasi-government or public authority, which is created by the legislature, but given a special corporate status to achieve a special purpose. So those kinds of organizations like the Rural Finance Authority or the Public Utilities Commission exist in that quasi-government space. And then looking at how you fill out an advisory board that's initially appointed or how that's brought together, but then ideally becomes self-perpetuating as many boards of organizations are. In Minnesota, we're looking at what kinds of qualifying projects, how you define that in the statute, and the ability to hold and recycle that one-time money, that making these funds available over a period of years. So with right now, the surplus that we have, if we, let's take one category of spending the governor has proposed, which we're highly supportive of here at MNIPL, is of the Solar on Schools program that has been being rolled out over the last year. And the governor is advocating for a larger amount of money. $61 million is in his budget for Solar on Schools, which is fantastic. And we know that's not going to cover all of the schools that we have across the state. So is there a way that can be leveraged? Those dollars can be leveraged to do more. And we have another example here on the next slide. Thanks, Terry. We're looking at Minnesota's wastewater treatment facilities. I think we have 800 of them in the state, and all of them could benefit from the have lower operating costs if they had solar combined with battery storage and increase the resiliency of those systems across the state. So is there a possibility that we could be taking part of this one-time funding and putting it in some kind of dedicated account within a green bank for the Public Facilities Authority to be able to equip our wastewater treatment facilities across the state? We know that it's, the wastewater treatment facility, the construction of it and the maintenance of it is an expense, but the operation of it is a significant expense too. So if you're able to lower those costs, that'll be helpful to the cities that have them. Thanks. So, I just want to take a moment to recognize the other things that are going on in our landscape right now. We have yesterday, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency brought out an updated report for the year 2020 and our sources of greenhouse gas emissions and storage. And this graph, so now I haven't updated this yet because the report just came out yesterday, but want to recognize that we have been supportive of and are excited about the 100% carbon-free electricity bill that is being heard possibly in the Senate tomorrow. So just want to encourage our engagement with that, the action alert we have, and understand that these pieces are moving, but that we have a lot of ground to cover for all of these sectors to get where we want to go for our transition to a near zero emission economy. Thanks. And I think, is there another slide there? I guess before we get to this piece and any other questions that are out there, I think one of the bills that's being heard today is House File 772, which is speaking to our building standards and encouraging our efficiency building standards to achieve net zero in 15 years. And while that is really great that we are moving those standards forward, we also know that we need to move as quickly as possible and as boldly as possible to address the climate crisis in equitable ways as much as we can. So that's why it's exciting to hear about these projects in Minneapolis. It's exciting to hear about the things you've been working on, Brendon. It's exciting to think about the way an innovative climate finance fund could be used to help us achieve better building outcomes more quickly for all of these communities. So great. With that, I'd like to just check in. Have there been, if there are any other questions that we should cover in the chat here? I will continue to look for those, but Juventino Meza, may I turn it over to you now?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and thank you for your time. My name is Juventino Meza and I will be the bridge between all of the amazing work we're doing at the legislature and engaging people in the movement in supporting our bold agenda for Indigenous rights and climate justice. I should say that this session started less than a month ago and so much has happened. So much will happen. And as we speak, so much is happening. For example, I was just handed over the bill that, if passed, will fund the Carnegie Library building in Park Rapids as a museum for Indigenous people in Minnesota. Also, right now, Joshua Lewis from Minnesota IPL is testifying for Senate File 315 that will require energy grantees and utilities to submit an annual diversity report. Many of you responded yesterday and today to contact your senator to support the 100% bill the Senate will vote on tomorrow. And we have a few opportunities coming up for you to get involved. This February 15 from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., we will be at the Capitol bringing Minnesotans from all walks of life to meet with senators and representatives. A link will be shared in the chat and it's available in our website as well. Another thing that we have is that we created a sign-up list for a rapid response team to help us mobilize our base. I will rapidly be reaching out to this group to work with me in ensuring that we have people from key districts to come to the Capitol on the 15th and meet with their legislator. A link will be shared in the chat as well. There will be many upcoming opportunities to get engaged as things move at the Capitol, including solar in schools, green financing, and others. We're going to keep you informed with bill numbers, messaging, and ask you to help us organize your local communities to contact your elected officials via emails, letters, calling, and meeting with legislators, or write letters to the editor. Finally, don't forget to share information we send you with your folks, donate to support this work, and follow us on social media. I hope you're as excited as I am for this bold legislative agenda for Indigenous rights and climate justice. We will follow up with a copy of this presentation, links to all the things we talked about, and our contact information. Thank you again, and we will connect soon. Sarah, I will pass it back to you for any closing words.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the expertise our speakers have brought. Thank you, Brendon, for joining us, and Kim as well, and for all of you for participating here. Let's stay in conversation about this. Thank you for the opportunities you're bringing us, Juventino, and we will send out an email tomorrow with all of the links and resources we've mentioned here. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks for doing this.